Let's march on with our Spheres series. I believe we are in episode number 6, and it is the sphere of IQ. So if you've been with me for a little bit, you know that we're walking our way through each sphere of the golden path. If you're new to the channel, my name's Cohen. I teach about gene keys, other weird esoteric stuff. So the sphere of IQ is what Richard Rudd, the founder of the gene keys, calls the start of the coal face of the Venus work. So the Venus sequence is the second sequence or second phase of working with what's called in the gene keys the golden path. And this golden path is in 3 phases with now a transcendent fourth, the first being the activation sequence, the second being the Venus sequence, and the third being the Pearl sequence. Now, technically, the Venus work actually starts where the activation work ends, which is at the sphere of your purpose. I'm going to chuck this marker because it's not cooperating. So that's technically where it starts. So why am I saying that the IQ is really the start of the coal face of the Venus work? It's because your purpose and your attraction, which are the first 2 spheres, are kind of the underlying components of the Venus work. They're tied to your dharma and your karma. But on the other side of a very broad and general understanding of dharma and karma that purpose and attraction gives us is the real work of the Venus sequence, which is unpicking the weave. I might not be able to see that, but that's okay, of our wounding patterns. That is what the Venus work is all about. Taking a look at the things that happened throughout our development and starting to see how those wounds, those sanskaras, if you will, are still impacting the things that we're doing every day now. And if we are not willing to unpick the weave of our wounding pattern, what happens is we get sucked back into the shadow frequency over and over and over again because somebody triggers one of these wounds. And when one of the wounds gets triggered, we go back to that part of our lives. We go back to answering that issue, that problem, as if we were 10 or 14 or 3 years old. And because you are responding as an insecure child version of yourself, a lot of times it's based around a protection mechanism because, well, you felt like you needed to protect yourself as a kid because your parents weren't filling that role in the way that they should have or could have. And please, this is a part of everyone's journey. So just blaming your parents is not the way to go here. We are wounded, all of us, through our separation with the divine, through being born into this human experience. So even if your parents were perfect, you'd still be feeling these things. So IQ starts this unpicking sequence so that we are not constantly being triggered and therefore responding in a low frequency nature, which then our attraction sphere pulls in more low frequency stuff and we just get stuck in that loop forever and ever. Instead, we unpick that weave of the wounding in reverse. So your sphere of your IQ is first, but it actually ties to the period of development when you are 14 to 21 years old. So as you're contemplating this, taking yourself back to that period of time in your life can be really helpful. And a really good thing to do might be to create a timeline for that time of your life. So mentors that you had, teachers that you had, big events that happened during that period of time. Or maybe a mind map is another thing you could do here, but just make it an art project, make it creative, do something that helps you to visualize this period of time in your life. Or if you're more verbal, record something about it for yourself. I don't care what it is, but starting to investigate all these things that happened. And what you'll find as you look at this time period in your life, forgive me, it's supplement time. What you will find is during this period of time, something happened to you. Could be a big or little T trauma. You might not even perceive it in that way, honestly. But something happened, and typically it comes from a very high emotional charge, actually. So even though this is your IQ, and maybe we should talk about that. So IQ, intellectual quotient, probably something you've heard before, very common, been around for a long time. EQ, emotional quotient, and that's actually the next sphere. And then SQ is the sphere after that, and that's your spiritual quotient. So IQ, most people have heard of. EQ, I would say most people have heard of, but some people have not, definitely newer than IQ. And then SQ is something that most people have not heard of. And as I said, that's your spiritual intelligence. So this initial pattern has to do with your intellect. It has to do with the way that you think about things in the world. And thinking in the West, we've really over-indexed on thinking and not, in my view, not enough on feeling, not enough on these dimensions of the unseen that we can't see. And so because we are so heavily dependent on our intellect, on our IQ, this can be a really difficult one to see because we're so close to it. We're so engulfed and immersed by it. Like we might not even realize that these are components of ourselves. And so it can be tricky. There can be a lot of denial that happens with the IQ. But I went on that tangent because during 14 to 21, there's something that had a really emotional charge to it, to the point that your emotional quotient, your ability to deal with that emotion, you couldn't handle it. And so what happened is your IQ turned on and you had a thought that popped into your brain that basically was your way of dealing with this really intense emotion. It was like, okay, so maybe you had a really high charge around a bully making fun of you at your freshman year or sophomore year of high school. And you were like super, super embarrassed. And in that moment, you thought, I don't give an F. I don't care. And that, separation, that pulling back, that armor that you put up now is a decision. And you didn't know this in the moment, but it's a decision that you made, and it's something that continued to stay with you for the rest of your development. And maybe you've been able to look at it, maybe you've been able to address it, but for most people, especially if all you've done thus far is like traditional psychotherapy, which nothing wrong with that. I've done it. I encourage you to do it. But if that's all you've done up until this moment, chances are intellectually you've processed what happens. But the moment that it becomes an emotional charge, in other words, when you're engaging in the hard stuff that happens in life, in that moment, you're going to get sucked back into the same pattern again because you haven't taken a look at it in a true, deep way from the perspective of your higher self as opposed to your intellect. It's interesting. The intellect in the gene keys is actually one of the shadow states. I believe it's the 61st or 62nd, perhaps, shadow. And where the intellect gets us, the gift that comes from it is precision. So our mind is able to be extremely precise. But moving through the world solely from intellect is actually something that totally disconnects us from being fully present in the world and being fully plugged into the world and knowing that we're safe and that we're supported. Like your mind is there to divide, it's there to analyze, it's there to separate. And in order to feel home, you need the opposite. You need to come back into union. Okay, so 14 to 21 years old, you're going to build a timeline to think about those things, looking for times that had extremely high emotional charges. As you do that, it's also, maybe helpful to know that your thinking mind is part of, or is, your mental body, and that's intimately connected to the mental plane. And this idea, or this teaching from the Gene Keys, and it's certainly not like Richard took this from other places, the idea helps to give enough space between you and your thoughts so that you're not solely identified with them, and you don't think that they're completely yours, which I know might be a real weird concept for some of you guys. But basically, we've got our mental body, right? And let's say the frequency of our mental body is something that looks like this, to visualize it. Okay, so you've got this kind of sine wave. Then we've got the mental plane, and this is like your thinking, the frequency of your thinking. Then we've got the mental plane, and within the mental plane, I've got a frequency that looks like this, and I've got a frequency that looks like this, and these are just things that are kind of floating around in space around us. And then there's this other thing that I'll draw right underneath it that looks like this. And that's my best attempt at making this match this. And so the thought that you have, because these things are resonant with one another, this is the thought that you're going to pick up. Whereas if your mental body was actually, if it had changed to this frequency, right, which is now this, and so this is the thought that you would have picked up on. And so that's really helpful as you engage in this IQ work, because if you get lost in your thoughts, if you get lost in your mental body, if you identify with that, it comes at a cost, and that cost is that you forget all the other parts of you. You forget your emotional body. You forget your physical body. Most importantly, you probably forget your causal body. And the causal body is the word that we use in the Gene Keys for your soul. And if you lose this, you lose love. And if you lose love, the words that are going to come out of your mouth are going to not only hurt the other person, they're going to hurt yourself. And that's important as you go with and deal with your IQ. The reason that this is in the Venus work is because it's oftentimes, and there is a component where it's to self, but oftentimes it shows up in relationship, right? The Venus work is about opening our heart and letting go of our armor and not needing to protect ourselves and talking with other people. And so when you're working with your IQ, if the soul isn't present, the heart isn't present, then when you are in relationship with another individual, what's likely to happen is what you say is going to trigger the wound in the other person. And then when they get triggered, they're going to say something that triggers you. And then you dig in and go deeper, and then they dig in and go deeper, and perhaps you've seen this dynamic before in your parents, in your marriage, in a billion places, right? This happens over and over and over again because we can't see our IQ. The shadow of our IQ is blinding us. So for me, it's seriousness. When I get triggered, I get so serious. I need to control what's happening. I need to think my way very intensely out of the problem because, man, life could end if I don't get this right. And the only way through it is to think so seriously and so intensely. And anybody that comes to me and bothers me in that process, I'm going to bark at them and bite their head off, which is then going to trigger them and just make things so much worse. So that what I just described, that kind of move between triggering one another, and I'm not going to get any deeper into this, it's in the Venus sequence course, as well as the book that's titled Love that you can get on Amazon. That's what's called the Eden Loop, and it creates a downward spiral of frequency. Another thing that's important to know about your IQ is that it's important to balance it with your EQ. So if you are all IQ, then you are going to come across as very sharp, very Martian. When I say Martian, like of Mars, although the placement is a little bit confusing here as far as the astrology goes. I'm not going to get into that. That's not my area of expertise. Doesn't even matter that much. But when you are IQ heavy, you've got this, like, you know, in the men's work that I do, we call it a warrior energy. It's like a very kind of sharp, boundaried, hard to connect with, hard to feel what's going on. Like, that's what the IQ heavy person feels like. Balance that with, or contrast that with an EQ heavy individual, who is somebody who is overly emotional, somebody who there is no boundary. So it's like really mushy. It's hard to understand what they're saying. It's hard to get a grasp on what they want you to understand, because it's just this mush of feelings that are coming across. And both of those are difficult. So we've got to balance IQ and EQ. That's really the work here. The pathway actually that connects your sphere of your IQ to your sphere of your EQ, which if you look at your Gene Keys profile, you'll see what I'm talking about here. That pathway is actually called the pathway. I don't know if you can see this, but I'm going to write it here anyway. At the lower frequency higher frequencies, it's called the pathway of intelligence. And at the lower frequencies, it's called the pathway of defense. So intelligence is how much IQ, how much EQ do I need? Knowing that, not through the intellect. Intellect is different from intelligence. Intelligence takes in all of us and actually stuff that we don't understand from outside of us. Intellect is just our thinking mind. So it's about using intelligence to find the proper balance so that we get the outcomes in the world that that will help our soul move closer to its dharma, closer to its purpose for being here. At the lower frequencies, it is the pathway of defense, because what we're doing is putting our guard up. We're protecting ourselves. We feel separate from the whole. We're worried that someone is going to take something from us. Namely, someone is going to take our peace. But nobody can take your peace from you. You can only give it away to them. Think that's all I need to talk about, want to talk about today. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'm happy to answer. Thank you for being here with me. If this was helpful to you, I'd love for you to join me on one of the free calls that I do. I do them every 2 weeks on Thursdays at noon. I don't know the date of the next one, so go to my website, check it out. And I also do this with people. I don't do readings, don't ask. But I do deep work with people. So if you are interested in digging in deeply on this stuff, reach out. Let's talk about it. Maybe I will help. Maybe I won't. Who knows? All right. Lots of love. Bye, guys.